What if Miami beats Texas A&M?
Woo! That ain't an Aggie yell, by the way. That ain't a whoop. All right, I'm not swaying. If Miami wins, it is a 5-alarm fire in College Station. Just pull yourself back a moment, and there's two things that you cannot avoid if A&M loses to Miami this week. Number one is the fact that there are no excuses anymore. Folks, there isn't a program in college football that has committed more resources to facilities, personnel, and now NIL than Texas A&M. They are pot committed in every sense of the word. They've built the buildings. They've hired the coach. They gave out that first 10-year contract. They gave Jimbo, what was it, like $75 million. Everyone was like, what? He's one of the only guys to win a national championship. Then they went out and they got aggressive in NIL to the point that they just signed not just the top recruiting class in the country, the best recruiting class in the history of recruiting. There are no excuses. They cannot lose this game. They played woefully bad on offense against App State. They cannot repeat that against Miami. And then here's the next layer. Why is it a five-alarm fire? No excuses, number one. And number two, they are staring down barrel at 2-4, maybe 1-5 to start this year. You think that's crazy? Look at their schedule, folks. If they can't beat App State at home, if they can't beat Miami at home, are they going to beat Arkansas, a top 10 team in AT&T Stadium in Arlington? Are they going to win at Mississippi State? Are they going to win at Alabama? In particular that week with all the Jimbo and Saban issues that are going to be flying around. Remember now, this Bama team at home, dominant. On the road, they've had their troubles. They've got to go to Tuscaloosa. You think the Tide won't be ready for Texas A&M after the Aggies won last year and stormed the field? After the war of words in the offseason? Then they've got to bye. Then they've got to go to South Carolina, who's banged up and hasn't played well. They host Ole Miss. That's a ranked team. They got to play Florida and Anthony Richardson, who's a good team. They've got to go to Auburn. They get their SEC cupcake in November at UMass, and then they've got LSU. Look at what they've got. If they get beat by Miami, they could very easily be 1-5, maybe 2-4, maybe 1-5. That would be App State, Miami. Then what? Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Alabama. You've got to win one of those games to be 2-4. 5-alarm fire if Miami wins this game. There's no excuses left for Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher, and that schedule is brutal. By the way, for Miami, you talk about a springboard in recruiting for one of the best recruiters in the entire country, for another school that's also becoming pot committed as far as committing to resources, committing to NIL. Boy, that would be a huge springboard for Miami if they were able to go in and beat Texas A&M. All right, what's next?
What if Nick Singleton has another breakout game?
Oh, man, I tell you what, Nick Singleton, the top running back in last year's recruiting class, signs with Penn State a year after Penn State falls woefully short in the run game and is really the reason why they along with injuries, but stumbled down the stretch. Remember, this was a top 4 team at one point in Iowa City. They're beating Iowa 17-3 at one point. Their quarterback goes down, and then their season just kind of crumbles, in part because they could not run the football. Now they get Nick Singleton, best running back in the class, and this dude is going off. Going off. They didn't run it great against Purdue, but how about on the year, Singleton 210 yards so far, 10.5 per carry. So then you start to think like, well, if Nick Singleton's going to run the ball really well, then Sean Clifford's going to take the next step and become much better. They're bringing along Drew Aller, their freshman quarterback, got him some snaps last week. They would beat Auburn this week in Auburn. If Nick Singleton is a breakout star, they would beat Auburn this week on the road. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Then you start to look at Penn State and you start to look at their schedule. And you're like, okay, well, what will they got coming up? Well, not much before they go to Michigan. So now you're looking at another year in which they would probably be 5-0 and in the top 13, 12, 11, maybe even top 10, depending on the results in the top 10, going to Michigan, and you would have a giant game against the Wolverines. I think that all depends on Nick Singleton. He allows them to develop what is a young defense. He allows them to play in the play action and RPO game with a quarterback that desperately needs an RPO and play action game. If Nick Singleton is a star, Penn State's all of a sudden legit. Then you start to look at that division, and the Big Ten East all of a sudden has 4 teams that you could say, yeah, they might be a top 10 team. Think about that. That all hinges on Nick Singleton, a freshman running back. Just played high school football a year ago. If he's a breakout star, that becomes the best division in football. Now, they might not have a team that's better than Georgia at this point, but they would have an elite team in Ohio State. They would have a team that just won the conference and went to the playoff and is playing at a high level in Michigan. And they would have an 11-win team from a year ago in Michigan State with Mel Tucker. And they would have a run game and a defense and an overall program that believes that they're a top 10 team, more like the early version of last season for Penn State. So watch out. If Singleton breaks out, they beat Auburn and likely go to Ann Arbor 5-0 for a game that I'm almost certain Gus and Ginny and I would be at. That's what they've got staring at them. And James Franklin, it would continue these wild ups and downs for him. You know, starting a 5-0 last year and then kind of crashing. The year before, they start, 4-1 or 0-4, and then it's been kind of all or nothing, these stretches for Penn State under James Franklin over the last couple of years, and you would sense that would continue. And what they're looking for is consistency throughout a whole season. Guess what gives you consistency throughout a whole season? A run game. Guess what gives you a run game? A breakout star like Nick Singleton. Next.
What if BYU beats Oregon?
Oh. Well, first, Oregon fans would panic after the egg that they laid against Georgia in week 1. But this would be more about BYU. If BYU can beat Oregon, think about it now. They just beat Baylor while Baylor was in the top 10. I know that game was late, but man, what a great environment in Provo. Kalani Sitake is doing a heck of a job. That's a guy that's going to be in line for a major coaching job. Trev Alberts. Kalani Sitake is a heck of a coach, and he's doing it at BYU. Then you start to have to look at BYU's schedule, and you're like, hold on, do they have enough firepower to make a playoff run? If they were to have a Baylor win under their belt and a BYU win under their belt, an Oregon win under their belt, that would be the defending Big 12 champ, the defending Pac-12 North champ. Guess what else they still have on their schedule? Notre Dame and Arkansas. Now, that Arkansas would be really difficult. And Arkansas is way more athletic than Baylor, and they're faster. And so BYU better get healthy. Remember, they beat Baylor without their top 2 wide receivers. Puka Nacua, he wasn't out there. So they're going to need to get healthy, certainly. But they would be in that conversation, non-Power 5 school, that you would start to think to yourself, like, maybe they would start to make a run. They would at least have the firepower. The one thing that you could say is that they would have an argument at that point if they won all of those games. And then the knock on them is that we are such a backloaded sport in terms of opinion and sentiment and certainly playoff rankings. They don't have that firepower late. Okay, because they're an independent and it's hard to build their schedule, they don't have those great games late in the season. So they'll be playing 4 or 5 cupcakes towards the end, save for Stanford, which I believe is their last game. But they don't have those games that everyone in November is going to be like, BYU, watch out for BYU. That's why I've always said for a group of 5 team, they need a 2-year cycle. It took Cincinnati 2 years to get into the playoff. BYU would kind of be on the first year of that cycle, and their November schedule would not help, in particular if Stanford doesn't bounce back after that USC loss last week. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here.
From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here. College football on Fox.